They arrested the wrong black woman. What they didn't know is she worked for the CIA. It all started on a Friday afternoon in late March, just outside of Norfolk, Virginia. The kind of day where everyone's itching to get home, crank the AC, and call it a wrap. Danielle Monroe was no different. She had just clocked out from her desk job at a government building downtown, picked up a few groceries, and was heading home to her townhouse in Chesapeake. She always took the back roads, less traffic, more peace. Danielle wasn't one for chaos. She kept her life simple, private, and clean. To most, she was just a quiet, polite black woman with glasses, a tidy car, and a knack for keeping to herself. $40 and fresh produce on the passenger seat. NPR humming low on the radio. Nothing about her screamed trouble, but just as she slowed at a yellow light near Compostela Road, flashing red and blue lights lit up her rear view. "Really?" she muttered, already pulling over. She wasn't speeding. No rolling stop, no phone in hand. Danielle knew how these things went. She took a deep breath and rolled down her window. Two officers approached, both white. One with buzzed hair and thick forearms, Officer Bradley Knox. The other, leaner with a sharper jaw, Officer Dennis Reese. They didn't look like they were here to talk. They looked like they'd already made up their minds. "License and registration," Knox barked. No greeting, no explanation. Danielle handed it over calmly, even smiled. "Is there a problem, officer?" "You tell me. Step out the vehicle." Her stomach tightened. "For what reason?" Reese chimed in, voice flat. "You match a description. We'll explain once we clear the vehicle." Danielle blinked. "A description of what?" "Ma'am, step out. Now." She could have argued. She could have demanded a supervisor, but Danielle didn't. Not because she was scared, but because she knew better. She'd been trained better. She stepped out. They told her to keep her hands visible. Then they opened her trunk, groceries, gym bag, spare tire. After about a minute, Knox's voice cut through the silence. Well, what do we have here?" Danielle turned. Her eyes narrowed. Knox held up a clear Ziploc bag filled with white powder. "You want to explain this?" Her heart stopped. "That's not mine." Reese was already snapping cuffs on her wrists. "Turn around now. You're being placed under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." Danielle's voice didn't rise. She didn't scream or cry. She just said, clear and calm, "That's not mine. You planted that." The officers didn't flinch. And just like that, Danielle Monroe, who spent the last decade quietly serving her country in ways most people couldn't imagine, was shoved into the back of a squad car like some street dealer. No one driving past would have thought twice, just another black woman in cuffs. But the silence in that back seat, that's where the shift happened. Danielle wasn't thinking about the handcuffs or the stairs. She was thinking about why. Why now? Why her? And more importantly, how the hell did they know to pull her over in the first place? But this was just the beginning. What happened next would flip the entire town upside down. By the time the news broke, it was already spinning out of control. Local woman arrested on drug charges in Chesapeake federal employee caught with cocaine in trunk. Shocking arrest of Danielle Monroe leaves neighbors in disbelief. Danielle's mugshot was everywhere. News tickers, Facebook groups, text chains. Same soft eyes, same expressionless face. But stripped of context, it told a story that wasn't hers. Down her block on Rollingwood Drive, the reactions were instant. "She always seemed polite, but I guess you never know," said one neighbor, peering through her blinds to a camera crew 2 houses down. Another neighbor, Mr. Hines, shook his head as he watered his lawn. "That's the 3rd person this year they got on that street. Something's going on over there." No one knew what Danielle really did. They just knew she was rarely home during the day, came and went with discipline, and never caused trouble. That was enough, for some, to assume she had something to hide. But in her friend group, the response was different. Furious texts, missed calls. Her best friend, Tasha Lemons, was pacing her living room when the phone finally rang. "You okay?" Tasha asked before Danielle could speak. "I'm in holding. They said I'm being arraigned tomorrow," Danielle said, voice steady. "What the hell happened? Cocaine? This don't make no sense." Danielle sighed. "I can't talk about it." "Can't? Or won't?" A pause. "I just need you to call someone for me. I can't use my regular contacts." Tasha froze. "Contacts?" Danielle lowered her voice. Get me a public defender, and don't talk to anyone else about this. You sound like this ain't your first rodeo." Danielle didn't answer. The call cut off. Meanwhile, the story gained traction. It wasn't the crime, it was the image. A professional black woman, polished and respected, now lumped into a statistic most people pretend doesn't include women like her. But Danielle wasn't sitting in that cell panicking. She wasn't crying, she was thinking, calculating. She couldn't use her real phone. She couldn't contact her agency. Her cover had to stay sealed, even now. And most of all, she had to keep her mouth shut. At her arraignment the next morning, she wore county-issued beige. No makeup, hair tied back. But her eyes were clear, sharper than ever. The judge, Ruth Callan, a no-nonsense type with sharp glasses and a sharper tongue, read the charges aloud. Possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Danielle stood tall. Her appointed attorney, Maurice Tillman, looked like he hadn't slept since Tuesday. A tall man with salt and pepper stubble, he held her file like it might catch fire. "We plead not guilty, Your Honor," he said. "Any remarks, Ms. Monroe?" Judge Callan asked. Danielle looked at the courtroom. News crews, spectators, eyes that didn't blink. "No comment, Your Honor." Callan stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Bail is denied. Defendant will remain in custody." Tillman whispered, "I'll visit you this afternoon. We'll go over your statement." Danielle leaned in slightly. "Don't trust anyone. Not yet. Not even you." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'll explain later." Back in the holding cell, Danielle waited. Every second was a test. Every silence, a trap. She had to keep her head down, keep quiet, and wait for the right moment. Because if she moved too soon, if she slipped up, it wouldn't just be her freedom on the line. It would be the entire operation. But the real problem? The men who arrested her weren't just dirty. They were confident. And that meant this ran deeper than anyone imagined. 3 weeks passed. Danielle sat in the corner of the courtroom, wrists resting on her lap, eyes locked on the table in front of her. She hadn't spoken to the press. She hadn't spoken to her coworkers. Hell, she barely spoke to her own lawyer. Maurice Tillman, now shaving regularly and showing up earlier, couldn't figure her out. He'd worked murder cases, child trafficking rings, corporate fraud. But Danielle? She was unreadable. "What kind of contractor are you?" he finally asked one afternoon, flipping through a manila folder filled with redacted work history. Danielle replied without looking up, "The kind that doesn't give interviews." He tried not to roll his eyes. "Look, if you're innocent, I need more than your vibe. These guys got a search report, a chain of custody lab results, all of it fake. You keep saying that, but you won't tell me why or how." She looked him in the eye. "Because you can't protect me, not yet." Maurice leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the file. "Then we're gonna lose." Danielle stood. "Then let them win, for now." The first hearing was procedural. Knox and Reese sat at the prosecution table, smug and confident. They wore their uniforms like armor, eyes forward, hands folded. Their testimony was clean, too clean. "Traffic stop was initiated due to erratic lane change," Knox said. "Defendant appeared nervous, asked us why we stopped her, refused to consent to a search. Based on behavior and her matching a prior bolo description, we initiated a probable cause search." Maurice stood. "And what exactly was that bolo for?" "Possible drug mule in a dark gray sedan, female, black, late 30s. "That could describe 100 people in the county." Knox shrugged. "That's why we followed the law. We found the drugs. She had a gym bag in the trunk, bottom zip pocket, tucked under a blanket." Maurice paused. "Body cam footage confirms that?" "Yes, sir." Reese nodded beside him. "Everything's in the report." The prosecution nodded along, clean, simple, airtight. But something kept nagging at Maurice. The language, the timing, the strange way Danielle sat silently through it all, like none of it mattered, like she was just waiting. After court, Maurice visited her in holding again. "You're not acting like someone whose life is on the line." Danielle tilted her head. "It's not my life they're threatening. It's my cover." Maurice frowned. "What does that mean?" She studied him. "Do you believe I'm guilty?" He looked at her hard, then finally said, "No, but I also don't think you're telling me the whole truth." Danielle didn't flinch. "Because I'm not." He scoffed. "Lady, I can't help you unless you let me help you." She leaned in close, voice low. "You don't need to win this. You just need to survive it." He stared at her, unnerved. What do you know that I don't? You'll find out. Soon. The next morning, Maurice requested access to the body cam footage. What he got back was strange. Your Honor, he said, standing in front of Judge Callan, the video has several audio gaps. 32 seconds at the trunk, 11 seconds when Ms. Monroe was pulled out of the car. That's not standard. The prosecutor shrugged. Could be a malfunction. Happens. Judge Callan raised an eyebrow. Get your IT expert in here. I want that checked. Outside, Knox and Reese shared a look. Barely a flicker, but Maurice caught it. Something was off. But he didn't know yet. He wasn't just fighting a bad arrest. He was about to step into something way bigger than a courtroom. Maurice spent the next week chasing details that didn't want to be found. He requested squad car GPS logs, missing. He subpoenaed the 911 dispatch audio that supposedly triggered the traffic stop, lost in transfer. Even the chain of custody report for the drugs had a time gap. The evidence had gone missing for nearly 6 hours before showing up logged in at the lab. Everywhere he looked, there were fingerprints, but none of them pointed to Danielle. Back in lockup, Danielle sat with perfect posture, arms folded. She hadn't aged a day through it all. No sag in her eyes, no cracks in her voice. Maurice noticed that. She didn't break because she'd been trained not to. You worked overseas? He asked her one afternoon. Danielle raised her eyebrows, not confirming, not denying. Your record says civilian analyst, but nothing about your clearance level. No performance reviews, no work contacts, no phone logs. She looked at him carefully. You think I'm a spy? I think you're more than what you say you are, and I think that's why they targeted you. Danielle gave the faintest smile. You're getting warm. Maurice leaned forward. If you're undercover, I can motion for a sealed hearing, off record. I already submitted the request. He paused. Wait, you did? She tapped the table once. I know the process. Just needed you to catch up. That same day, a sealed envelope arrived at Judge Callan's desk. It had no return address, no sender, just her name on the front and the Department of Justice watermark faint in the corner. Inside was a classified request for a closed session hearing, citing federal interest and clearance exceptions under national security guidelines. Attached to it, a name, Danielle J. Monroe, Tier 3, clearance, operational division, black designation, eyes only. Judge Callan called both legal teams into chambers the next morning. We've got a situation, she said. This defendant has active federal classification, CIA, high-level stuff. We're not allowed to ask what she does or who she works for, but I have direct orders from Langley not to proceed with public questioning regarding her role or assignments. The prosecutor, a sharp, fast-talking guy named Elliot Graves, smirked. So we just pretend she's not part of the intelligence community while she's being tried for drug trafficking? Judge Callan didn't blink. No, Mr. Graves, we pretend nothing. We either adjust the case to fit constitutional standards or the feds step in. Graves looked flustered. What does that mean? It means the case may no longer be yours. Maurice said nothing, but in his mind, the pieces clicked. Danielle wasn't just some intel desk jockey. She was covert, possibly black ops. And if that's true, if that's who they tried to frame, then these two cops had stepped on a landmine. At the next court session, the atmosphere was thick. Spectators sensed something had shifted. The officers still looked composed, but Reese was sweating through his collar, and Knox wasn't making eye contact. Maurice walked up to the bench slowly, a new confidence in his voice. Your Honor, I'd like to re-question the officers. We now have documentation suggesting inconsistencies in the chain of custody. Judge Callan nodded. Proceed. Maurice approached Knox. You said the evidence was logged at 7:24 p.m.? Yes. Then explain why Officer Reese's body cam shows you both at Tap House Bar and Grill at 7:10. Reese flinched. Knox's jaw tightened. We dropped it off earlier. Probably a typo. Maurice turned to the judge. Can I submit an exhibit? Footage from a restaurant manager who filmed the officers on his phone, drinking, in uniform, during the time the drugs were supposedly in their custody. Graves stood, objecting, but it didn't matter. Callan leaned back. Motion accepted. Submit the video. The courtroom murmured. Danielle watched, silent, waiting, still playing the long game. But the clock was ticking. Because soon, very soon, someone in Washington was going to blow the lid off this entire case. 2 days later, everything stopped. The court was set for a routine hearing. Knox and Reese were expected to continue their testimony. Danielle would sit quietly, as always. Maurice had more footage ready, more questions lined up. Nothing seemed out of place until the bailiff stepped into the courtroom holding a white folder marked classified. Authorized recipient only in bold red letters. He handed it to Judge Callan in silence. She took it without a word, opened it, and read the first page. Her expression didn't change, but the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted, subtle but sharp, like a cold gust through an open door. She cleared her throat. Court will take a 10-minute recess. Counsel to chambers. Now. Maurice followed, heart pounding. Once the doors shut behind them, Callan placed the folder on the table between them. This changes the entire framework of this trial. Graves looked annoyed. What's in it? She didn't look at him. Instead, she looked at Maurice. You may want to sit for this. She turned the folder so they could read the page she'd just seen. At the top, Operation Shelter Veil, active covert personnel. Beneath it, a name, Danielle J. Monroe, covert intelligence officer, Tier 3 classification, identity protected under Federal Directive 14B. Maurice whispered, Jesus. Judge Callan continued. The defendant has been on assignment for the Central Intelligence Agency for over 6 years, fieldwork, domestic and foreign. Everything she's done, including her silence, was under direct protocol. She wasn't allowed to speak without clearance. Graves leaned over the page, face pale. You're telling me we've been prosecuting a CIA operative over a planted bag of coke? Callan nodded. Yes, and Langley didn't intervene because they were watching, monitoring. Watching who? She met his eyes. You. When court resumed, the judge ordered the courtroom cleared except for essential personnel and legal teams. No media, no phones, nothing on record. Danielle was brought in, still shackled, still silent. Judge Callan looked her in the eye for the first time and said, You're free to speak, Ms. Monroe. Danielle exhaled slowly as if the air had been locked in her lungs for months. She stood. I've worked undercover for 6 years. My assignment involves tracking criminal networks operating inside federal systems, including law enforcement. We received intel months ago about a possible link between narcotics traffickers and several precincts in this state. 2 names came up repeatedly. She turned slowly to face the officers at the prosecution table. Bradley Knox, Dennis Reese. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Danielle kept going. We didn't have proof, just whispers, tips, movement of evidence in and out of evidence lockers, controlled substances showing up on the street after being destroyed. So we set a trap. I was the bait. Graves stood, stunned. You let yourself get arrested? She nodded. Because they always follow a pattern. Traffic stop, fabricated search, drugs they already had in their possession. Maurice sat back, stunned. He thought he'd seen courtroom drama before, but this was different. This was nuclear. Danielle continued. The moment they logged the drugs, we knew. Internal Affairs swept the lab the same night, found unregistered samples matching street narcotics traced to 2 unsolved cases. One of those cases involved a 16-year-old who overdosed in a park 2 towns over. That sample matched what they claimed was found in my trunk. Judge Callan looked over at the 2 officers. You have the right to remain silent, she said. But Knox exploded. This is bull. She's lying. You can't prove any of that. Danielle didn't move. She didn't even blink. Reese stood too. You don't get it. You think we're the only ones? This goes all the way up. She's not going to fix it with some badge and a story. That was the first time anyone noticed the man in the back corner of the room. Gray suit, clean haircut, zero expression. He stepped forward. Agent Samuel Hayes, CIA Internal Oversight. We have federal warrants for both officers. Charges include tampering with evidence, conspiracy, obstruction, and trafficking. Security escorted the officers out. No more shouting, just the sound of heels on tile and stunned silence. Maurice looked at Danielle. You played all of us. She looked at him and said softly, I didn't have a choice. But while justice had finally kicked the door open, the fallout was only just beginning. The headlines changed overnight. CIA agent framed by local officers in shocking courtroom. Reveal federal operation exposes corruption in Chesapeake PD. Danielle Monroe, identified as covert operative, clears name in stunning trial. People were stunned, not just by what happened, but by who it happened to. The quiet woman down the block, who smiled politely and raked her leaves on Sundays, had been living a double life while being hunted by the very system she once protected. Danielle didn't walk out of court with a parade, no press conference, no victory speech. She stepped into the back seat of a government SUV and vanished. No one knew where she went. No one asked. Maurice sat alone in his office that evening, still stunned. The courtroom had emptied hours ago, but the weight of it hadn't lifted. He kept replaying her words in his head. You don't need to win this. You just need to survive it. He never understood it fully, until now. In the days that followed, the dominoes began to fall. Knox and Reese weren't the only ones. Their names led to others. A small network of officers, lab technicians, even a lieutenant, all tied to stolen narcotics, tampered evidence, and hush money. The city scrambled. The mayor called for an independent audit. The police chief resigned. Protesters filled the courthouse steps demanding accountability. And as for Judge Callan, she signed more warrants in 1 week than she had the entire month prior. But underneath the chaos, something else began to take root. Shame. Shame from people who once whispered about Danielle being the type. Shame from neighbors who never questioned the charges. Shame from people who shared her mugshot but never shared her truth. Tasha Lemons, her best friend, spoke once to the press. You never really know what people carry. She didn't just protect the country. She protected people who wouldn't have blinked if she'd gone to prison for something she didn't do. That's grace, and it's rare. The city of Chesapeake announced an internal review of over 40 past convictions involving Knox and Reese. At least 6 were overturned within the month. Maurice kept his distance after the trial, but 3 weeks later, he got an envelope in the mail. No return address, no note. Inside was a photo, Danielle, standing on a tarmac somewhere overseas, in cargo pants, aviators, wind tugging at her braid, and a sticky note on the back with one word, safe. He smiled. A few months later, Danielle sat in a small cafe in Flagstaff, Arizona. She wore jeans, a faded hoodie, and no badge. No mission. Just peace. A young waitress brought her coffee, glanced twice, then walked away. Nobody recognized her. Nobody asked questions. But Danielle still looked over her shoulder once, out of habit. Old instincts die hard. She pulled out a notebook, not for intel, just her thoughts. She wrote, "It's easy to forget how quickly your story can be stolen, how a lie, repeated enough times, becomes fact to the world. But truth doesn't die. It waits. It watches. And when it rises, it doesn't whisper. It roars." She closed the notebook, finished her coffee, and left cash on the table. No trace, no name. Just a woman walking free. Because this time, she wasn't hiding who she was, but there was still one final thing left to say, and it wasn't hers alone. The case of Danielle Monroe didn't just expose 2 corrupt cops. It peeled back the layers on a system too many people blindly trust, too many times. A system that only believes someone is worth defending once the damage is already done. A system where silence is often mistaken for guilt, and truth is only valued when it's loud. But Danielle didn't fight with noise. She fought with patience, with focus, with an understanding that sometimes justice has to play the long game. What happened to her could happen to anyone. That's the scary part. Because it wasn't about drugs or badges or even secrets. It was about perception. The moment she was pulled over, she stopped being a person. She became a suspect, a headline, a case file, and the only thing that saved her was that she wasn't alone. She had training. She had people watching from the shadows. But most folks, they don't have that. They just get swallowed up. So maybe the real takeaway isn't about spies or secret missions. It's about remembering that every person you see, every mugshot, every headline, every courtroom sketch has a full story. One you probably don't know, one worth hearing. And if you're in a position to listen, or speak up, or fight for someone when they can't fight for themselves, do it. Because staying quiet when you see something wrong, that's how people like Knox and Reese keep winning. Let Danielle's story be a reminder. Not just that justice exists, but that it only works when someone's willing to protect it, even if nobody's watching. If you watched this story to the end, share it. Talk about it. Ask questions. That's how the truth stays alive.